Have you ever noticed how some people just stop talking, stop explaining themselves, stop reacting, and everyone around them calls that coldness? It feels normal, but it isn't. That's one of the most unfair and most mistaken interpretations there is. People who go quiet aren't cold. They're people who've learned, and almost no one notices that point. Their silence didn't come from a lack of emotion. It came from too much of it, from the build-up of trying over and over again, from conversations that led nowhere, from explanations given to people who didn't want to listen, from feelings shared with those who didn't know how to handle them. At some point, speaking started to hurt more than staying silent. And that's where the dynamic begins to change. Because contrary to what many believe, this isn't shyness, it isn't a lack of personality, and it isn't disinterest. It's pure psychology, it's emotional memory. It's a protective mechanism that settles in when the mind realizes that opening up too much comes at a real cost. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you were the person who kept trying, kept pushing, kept believing, until you realized you were always the one getting hurt. If that sounds familiar, stay with me. What you're about to uncover might surprise you, because understanding this kind of silence completely changes the way you see yourself and the way you interpret distance, introversion, and the need to protect yourself from being disappointed all over again. And maybe that's exactly why talking about this topic makes so many people uncomfortable, because when someone learns to go quiet, there's almost always a story behind it, a story that was never fully told, stories of people who tried to explain themselves, tried to be understood, tried to be honest about what they were feeling, and ended up feeling exposed, ignored, or diminished. If you recognize yourself anywhere in that, it's worth leaving that here. Sometimes, writing in the comments about what touched you most isn't just venting. It's a way of realizing that other people are living in this same silence too. And when you like a video like this, it isn't just an automatic gesture. It's a quiet way of saying that this kind of conversation matters, that it deserves to keep reaching people who are also trying to understand why they pulled away in order not to get hurt again. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, and you feel drawn to follow other deep conversations like this, subscribing becomes a natural step, almost like choosing to stay close and keep listening. Because what looks like silence on the surface is actually layered with things almost no one notices. And that's exactly where understanding starts to go deeper. Almost no one notices this, but no one wakes up one day and simply decides to stop talking. It doesn't happen suddenly, and it isn't dramatic. Silence is born in a small moment, almost invisible, the kind that goes unnoticed by anyone on the outside. It might have been an ordinary conversation, a sincere attempt to explain something, trust placed in the wrong person. They spoke, and not just a little. They spoke carefully, with expectation, with the hope of being understood. The problem is what came next, the dismissive response, the indifferent look, the twisted interpretation, the feeling that what was shared ended up being used against them. That feels normal, but it isn't. That's the moment when something quietly reorganizes inside. The mind registers the impact and begins adjusting its stance to avoid repeating the pain. This is indeed not coldness. It's emotional learning, a decision that doesn't happen at the level of conscious logic, but deep in the background of memory. The person doesn't think, "I'm going to stop talking." They just start speaking less, explaining less, exposing less, and before they realize it, something has changed. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because that micro moment reshapes the entire emotional journey. That's where the silent idea is born, that talking too much is costly, that opening up comes with a price that isn't always worth paying. And that idea begins to affect future decisions, relationships, choices, even the way someone sees themselves in the world. From the outside, it looks like control. On the inside, it's a transformation forced by disappointment. If you've lived through something like this, write it in the comments. This makes sense to me. After that first impact, silence starts to take on a new meaning, because in the beginning, going quiet really does feel like protection, and in a way, it is. When someone speaks less, they also reduce the immediate risk of conflict, misunderstanding, and fresh disappointment. Fewer explanations, less emotional wear, less accumulated frustration. The relief is real. The body relaxes. The mind feels like it's found a way out. This is almost never conscious. But the brain learns quickly, a simple, practical, and seemingly effective rule. If I don't speak, I don't get frustrated. And that logic begins to guide small, everyday decisions. The person hesitates before opening up, chooses silence in conversations they once would have faced head-on, avoids expressing feelings that might create a negative reaction. It looks like maturity, like self-control, even like emotional intelligence. And on the outside, everything does seem to work better. Less friction, less drama, less energy spent trying to be understood. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because this is where the hidden truth lives. Every form of protection comes with an invisible cost. The silence that protects also begins to shape the mindset, influence choices, and change the way a person relates to themselves. Little by little, what started as a temporary mechanism turns into a pattern. The emotional journey continues, but in defensive mode. The impact doesn't show up right away, because in the short term everything feels safer, but behind the scenes something starts to be held back, compressed, postponed. It isn't obvious pain, it's a quiet absence, a sense that something was left behind while life kept moving forward. If this part of the conversation touched something you recognize, leave it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. Over time, this defensive mode starts to come with a price that almost no one notices right away. The person really does experience fewer direct conflicts, fewer explicit frustrations, fewer emotional clashes. But along with that, something else begins to happen. They slowly disconnect. They don't truly connect anymore. They don't fully express themselves. They don't feel seen the way they once did. On the outside, everything looks under control. They become the strong one, the balanced one, the reserved person, the one who doesn't cause problems and rarely seems shaken, and that often gets praised. But on the inside, something starts to become isolated. It isn't an obvious kind of loneliness, the kind that draws attention. It's a functional, quiet loneliness, one that allows you to live, work, socialize, but not truly share. The person learns how to function without relying on others, without expecting emotional safety, without betting on depth. It looks like autonomy, but it carries a hidden truth. This isn't full independence. It's emotional containment. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because this kind of isolation doesn't come from a lack of interest in people. It comes from accumulated decisions made along the journey. Small choices meant to avoid pain end up shaping the mindset, influencing relationships and shrinking emotional presence. The person is there, but not fully. They speak, but they measure. They listen, but they filter. They feel, but they hold back. And the longer someone stays in this state, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between protection and a prison. The impact doesn't arrive as a collapse. It arrives as a vague sense of distance, like something essential is always one step behind. If you notice this movement happening in you, leave it in the comments. This makes sense to me. There comes a moment when something starts to shift inside, even if the person can't quite explain what it is. The silence that once brought relief begins to feel heavy. It doesn't hurt like a major disappointment, but it weighs on you in a constant, muted way. That's when protection loses its lightness and turns into effort. The person starts to notice they're always holding back, always filtering, always choosing distance as the default. And then an uncomfortable question shows up, the kind almost no one likes to face. What if I pulled away too much? What if the silence that once saved me is now isolating me? That might sound exaggerated, but it isn't. This is the critical point of the journey, the moment the mind begins to suspect that something has slipped out of balance, because protecting yourself shouldn't mean disappearing, and yet, behind the scenes, that's exactly what happened. Decision after decision, all small, all reasonable, slowly created a gap that grew too wide between the person and the world. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because recognizing this invisible limit changes everything. There's a thin line between protection and prison, and it isn't marked by intense pain, but by absence. An absence of exchange, of spontaneity, of real presence. The person isn't broken. They aren't lost. They simply realize, with a certain jolt, that they've unlearned how to return. They no longer know how to speak without feeling exposed, how to open up without triggering defensive mode. And that realization doesn't come with ready-made answers. It comes with unease. A hidden truth begins to surface. Maybe the problem was never feeling too much, but learning to hide for too long. If you stayed until the end, it's because this conversation touched something real. And when that happens, it's worth showing up. If you feel like it, leave a comment with something simple, like, "This message was meant for me," or "I'm with you until the end." It's not just about writing. It's about creating a quiet meeting point between people who've lived through similar things. When you like a video like this, you help this kind of reflection keep circulating, reaching people who still haven't found the words for what they're feeling. And if this content brought you clarity, a sense of company, or even a bit of relief, subscribing to the channel is just a calm way to continue this journey at your own pace, without pressure. There's a video right here that complements this topic and goes deeper into the point we left open. Click it and keep going with me there.